Góðan daginn. Við öllum sæl og blessuð og við erum velkomin til þessa fundar sem haldið á vegum Samtaka fjárfesta og Viðskiptafræðideildar Háskóla Íslands. Boði heiti ég og er formaður Samtaka fjárfesta. Jella Benner-Heinacher, ræðumaður okkar, er framkvæmdastjóri systursamtaka, Samtaka fjárfesta í Þýskalandi Deutsche Schutzvereinigung für verndar. Þýskusamtökin, öflug samtök með 20.000 félagsmenn og vegum samtakana farið á aðalfundi allra hlutafélaga í Þýskalandi sem skráð eru á nefndina. En það eru 60-50 aðalfundir á hverju ári. Samtökin hafa náð að gera sig gildandi á fundunum með einskiptri umfjöllun og fyrirspurnum sem forráðamenn fyrirtækjanna hafa á tíðum kveinkað sér undan. Samtök fjárfesta á Íslandi hafa unnið mikið með hinum þýsku systursamtökum sínum á vettvangi Shareholder, Samtaka fjárfesta í Brussel. Þangað hefur við sótt hugmyndir og ábendingar sem hefur reynst heppilegt að hafa í fararbroddi okkar. Jella Benner-Heinacher er lögfræðingamennt og hefur verið framkvæmdastjóri þýsku samtakanna síðustu 19 ár. Hún hyggst greina okkur frá því hverju dómsmál til verndar, smærri hluthöfum hafa skilað í Þýskalandi. Sem er viðfangsefni sem talar beint til okkar hér á Íslandi. Erindi hennar verður á ensku og eftir það gefst færi á að bera fram fyrirspurnir. Jella Benner-Heinacher, ich heiße Sie willkommen bei uns in diesem Schwestergesellschaft Ihrer Schutzvereinigung für Verbraucher sowie dem betriebswirtschaftlichen Bereich des Universitäts Islands. Es macht uns heute, dass Sie nach Island gekommen sind und wir warten auf den Vortrag und hoffen, die Gleichheit mit Island herauszufinden, das uns in unsere Bemühungen später. Ja, Vorschluss.
Vielen Dank, Boði, für die tolle Einleitung, aber ich werde den Vortrag nicht in Deutsch halten. I think I will continue in English, although I think a lot of you understand and speak German. And first of all, I would like to say thank you, tak, for the invitation that I could come here, and also tak for the very warm welcome I received here in Iceland, and this morning I learned today is Friday, the 13th of September 2013, but I think it's a very lucky day for us. So I didn't notice that I was not aware of this date before I came here, but it was always a lucky day for me, the 13th, Friday, and I think it will be the same. Well, I will give you a short view on what is happening in Germany and with the minority shareholders, about the minority shareholder rights, but also on the legal actions that we managed to do. And maybe first of all, I should start to introduce our organization, DSW. It's a very long name, it says Deutsche Schutzvereinigung für Verbraucher. Nobody really understands it, so we say DSW. It's easier. We were founded after World War II, and we have currently more than 25,000 members, mainly private investors. So we are a non-profit organization, like a sister organization from Iceland, and I would like to show you a little bit. We are also the head office of the Group Association of the Investment Clubs, 7,000 investment clubs in Germany. And we are also founding member of the European Association, now called Eurofinius, former times called Shareholders and Euro Investors. But I think I will come to these European activities at the end of my speech. Now, what do we do for our members? Why should we become member in our non-profit organization? Well, we offer all kinds of services around the general meeting in Germany. We offer pre-AGM services before preparing the general meeting, and this includes the analysis of all the agendas. In Germany, we have 650 listed German companies at the stock exchange. So we analyze the agenda, and for our members, we give them vote recommendations. So how they should vote in the general meeting if they don't go there themselves. Of course, we also offer the vote execution itself, which means that we really send our representatives to these 650 meetings in Germany. We have 75 speakers all over Germany, different places, from north to south, and they speak there, ask questions, and they vote for our members. We do not only offer vote execution in Germany, we also offer via Brussels, the European organization, vote execution cross-border in other countries in Europe. But also this is a topic that I will mention at the end. We also have an electronic voting platform that we offer. And what do we do after the meeting? I mean, some people might think we are only busy working from, let's say, April until July, but it's not true, because after the season, we prepare and write reports on the general meeting. We also look at possible legal actions that we would take if something went wrong in the season, if some shareholder rights were violated, for example, then we are preparing these legal actions after the season. And then in the fall, right now we have enough time for studies, and we, in the meantime, we do a lot of research and studies. We have dividend studies, where we measure the dividends that the German companies pay. We have a yearly directors' pay study, where we show the development of the directors' pay in Germany, also compared to other European countries. And we have a study on the supervisory board, where we analyze the structure, the independence, and issues like diversity. So that was enough on our organization. Let me come to the real topic. And I think in order to understand the German system, I should say a few words on our corporate governance system, because it might be different from your Icelandic system. I'm not quite sure, but we have what we call a two-tier board system, which means that we have the management board on one side. They are responsible for the daily business. They do the daily operation. And then we have the supervisory board, which is supervising the management board. So there's only a supervising, overlooking task of the supervisory board. Maybe one thing I should mention is, and that's a very German specialty, we have something like Mitbestimmung, co-determination, and you can also see it on the board, on the supervisory board, because in our companies we have 1/3 to 1/2 of the board employee representatives, and the rest then is shareholder representatives. So, as you can see, this is a very German system built on consensus, very much also with the employee side. The general meeting, of course, for us as an organization of shareholders, is the most important platform to communicate with the company and the management. So let us start maybe by giving you a short overview on what our shareholder rights are before the meeting, before the general meeting. Well, there are 3 very important rights, and the first right is we have the right to call a general meeting, and what is required is that you vote 5% of the share capital, and of course there are some deadlines that you have to follow. Second, the very important right before the meeting is the right of the shareholder to add items to the agenda. Again, you will need 5% of the share capital to ask for such an addition, and you also have to follow some deadlines. The most popular right of the shareholders, very heavily used in Germany, also by our organization, is the right to file a counter-proposal, what we call counter-proposal. Well, it is popular because you don't need the 5% share capital, you only need 1 share. That's all. And counter-proposal means that you propose to vote against the proposal of management. That's why it's counter-proposal. So here you have only a deadline of 14 days before the meeting. This is very often used by our organization. Maybe I should also mention at this point that we as an organization have an escalation strategy, as we call it, which means that if we have an important shareholder issue, we first of all look to have a dialogue with the management and try to solve the problem in a dialogue. Now, if this does not work, then we very often go to the counter-proposal. We go to the general meeting, find a counter-proposal, and ask the other shareholders to support our counter-proposal. Very often, this helps already, because very often management already changes the item on the agenda as we wrote it. If it doesn't help, then we go the next step of the escalation, and that would be we release a press report, or we even invite for a press conference if we think this is really an important issue. And the last step we would take is, if nothing helps, then we would file a legal action, we would file a claim. But this is just to show you that we are actually pretty conservative, because we try to do and solve the things, first of all, by a dialogue, and the legal action is actually at the very end. Now, if we come to the shareholder meeting itself, this is, by the way, a CEO which is obviously not performing as well as the shareholders might expect. Let me take an example, a case which was very heavily debated in Germany in this season. That is the general meeting of ThyssenKrupp. I don't know if you heard about it. It's one of the world leading steel companies, and it's a very old company, actually a merger from the old steel company ThyssenKrupp with the old steel company Krupp. Very important for the German industry, and today we know that they did take some wrong investment decision when they built production plants in Brazil and in North America. And this led at the end, and this year it came really out, it led to more than 2 billion euros losses in the German company. This company is almost bankrupt. And of course, the main question for the shareholder meeting, which took place this year, was who is responsible for these losses, who has to possibly compensate for the losses suffered. So that was really a hot issue in Germany. And I will take this general meeting just to show you a little bit what we can do as a shareholder association to cover these issues. Now, we spoke about the shareholder rights before the meeting. Now I want to mention the shareholder rights during the meeting. So you have the right to attend the meeting with 1 share, even if it's only a preference share, you are allowed to attend. We do not have any voting ceilings or multiple voting rights, as you sometimes, for example, find in Sweden, where they have A and B shares. We don't have anything like this. And each shareholder has the right to speak at the general meeting, and also has the right to ask questions. These are 2 things. So you can speak, you can ask questions. The questions should, of course, concern somehow the company. Now, just to give you a little impression of how a general meeting can be, if you look at the 30 largest companies, the DAX companies in Germany, in their general meeting, you usually have meetings with 4,000 up to 10,000 shareholders attending such a meeting. So it's a big issue, a big event, Deutsche Telekom was a very popular share when they had their IPO, and they had at the very first meeting 10,000 shareholders. It's hard to find even a menu for that German. And if you imagine that each of these shareholders could speak and ask questions, now you know why there are very long meetings, and such a meeting can really last 12 hours. So you start at 10 o'clock in the morning and can last until 10 o'clock at night, if you're lucky, because you have to close the session before midnight. If not, all the resolutions have been valid. So you have to get along. So this is just to give you a short impression on how this can go on. Now, what will be the typical shareholder resolutions of the German general meeting? I think it's probably similar to what you have. Of course, number one is the approval of the dividend, still the most important issue for the shareholders. Then we have something which is called discharge of the management board. Discharge, I don't know if you have this. In Iceland, I think it's somehow a very German thing. Discharge means that we discharge the board because we approve their activities. So it's an approval by the shareholders. And we also do this for the supervisory board if we approve the activity of the supervisory board. Election of the auditor, that's a yearly upcoming item on the agenda. And then every 5 years, usually, because that's the period of the supervisory board, you have election of the supervisory board, but only for the shareholder representatives, because the employee representatives are sent mainly by the unions and by workers. So that's a special case. Also, this is not on here, we also have from time to time changes of statutes or bylaws, which is also a very important item on the agenda. Now, we come back to the shareholder meeting of Düsseldorf this year. I think it's a good example because we filed a counter proposal. As I mentioned, we just need one share for this. We, as a shareholder association, do not even need a share, we just need a shareholder that is giving us his shares. So we propose to vote against the discharge of the supervisory board and also the discharge of the management board, because we felt that there is a responsibility for the disaster in Brazil and in North America, and that's why we did not want to approve their activities for the last year. And secondly, and that's maybe more interesting, we also asked for what we call a special audit with regard to the failures of the board to act with due diligence, and there were also some weaknesses in the compliance system, and therefore some major violations of the cartel law. So there were a lot of issues where we thought that they did not act with due diligence. So this was the reason for the special audit, and maybe I just shortly explain to you who can ask for a special audit and what you need. So what you need is at least 5% of the share capital or shares with a nominal value of 500,000 euro. And if you ask for the audit, it has to be clear that the audit can only deal with events that happened in the last 5 years. And what's also important, you have to ask for a special audit at the general meeting, and the general meeting has to vote on it. Now, all this happened at Düsseldorf. The special audit was asked by DSW, was put for a vote, and no big surprise, did not get the majority of the votes, because the company has a majority shareholder who was, of course, against it. But this is not such a disaster for us, because then we can go to court and ask the court to appoint the special audit. So that is the procedure, and that was how it was done. So we really went to court, asked for the special auditor. We have a special auditor now. He started working on the due diligence examination of the board members, but we count that in general you need at least 1 year to have an outcome from the special audit, and then you can think about the next steps. So for us, it would be a good result if the special auditor would find out, yes, there were some violations of their duty to act with due care, and then we can talk about the next steps about compensation. And this is leading me to the next steps, to the shareholder rights after the meeting. After the general meeting, we also have some rights. Shareholders, or the shareholder group, or us, with minimum 10% of the shares, can file an indirect compensation claim against the company. Indirect means that it actually obliges the board, the supervisory board, to file a claim against the board members who did not act with due diligence. Unfortunately, I have to say, there is no direct compensation claim against members of the board in Germany, especially not for a single shareholder. Unfortunately, we are not in the US. We do not have anything like class actions, but this is the way to go. It's the derivative action. Now, there are also other things after the meeting. For example, if you have a squeeze out of the minority shareholders, for example, if the company is taken over, then any single shareholder can go to court and ask the court to examine the adequacy of the takeover offer, which I think is a very good instrument, and it's not cost intensive for the shareholder because the company has to pay for this legal procedure, and the outcome is also without risk for the shareholder because the price can also always only be better. And this legal proceeding is called Sparifjáreigenda, and actually I think even Austria introduced it because they thought it's a good thing to have for shareholders. Also, the shareholders can afterwards, after the general meeting, contest the resolutions of the general meeting, go to court and say, well, I contest this resolution because major shareholder rights are violated. And then, if he is successful, the resolution would be declared invalid. And the last right is they can go to court, the shareholders, if they have a feeling that their questions were not answered properly, then they can go to court and ask for the information by a court, and very often the court decides in favor of the shareholder. So let me go to some other cases just to explain a little bit the situation in Germany. Siemens, I'm sure you all know Siemens, the company, and they had a few years ago a big corruption scandal, and there were a lot of board members involved, both on the side of the management board and also on the side of the supervisory board. Some of you may know the name of the former CEO, Erindi. So he was a very popular man until this corruption scandal. And again, this is a good case for an indirect compensation claim, a derivative action by the supervisory board of Siemens against the members of the management board who were responsible for this corruption scandal. Now, the damage was huge, and there was the SEC involved because of US activities, so the damage was about 2.5 billion euros. Now, at the end, there was a settlement. Both parties agreed on the settlement, but unfortunately, it was only a settlement of 5 million euros. So you see the damage was immense, and the compensation was pretty low. This was actually the sum when the insurance, the director's office's insurance, were ready to pay to the company. Next to Siemens, maybe we have a look at Porsche. Everybody knows Porsche, I think. Porsche in 2008 tried to take over Volkswagen by a lot of swaps and other smart ideas, but they were not smart enough because at the end they failed, and at the end it was Volkswagen who took over Porsche. So this is quite an interesting chapter, and still today, I mean we have 2013, still today we have criminal procedures running. We have suspicion of market manipulation by the former management of Porsche. We also have civil procedures running because of misleading information of the capital markets. And we have compensation claims by US funds, both in Germany, for $4 billion, that's what they asked in Germany, and also in the US. And all these procedures are still pending, and we do not expect actually a final decision in the next 2 years. It will take some time. So, IKB, probably not as time, but it was in former time one of the big German banks for the Mittelstand, or medium-sized companies in Germany. Very important bank, unfortunately, in former times, and they, as I heard this morning, it's quite interesting, they invested also in subprime products, and that was the big mistake. They didn't keep on to their conservative business. They wanted to have a higher return, so they invested in products that they did not really understand. And since it was off the balance sheet, they didn't really notice, or the supervisory board did not notice it before. And so there was a very surprising development, because in July we still had a quarterly report of IKB saying good results, wonderful business, and 10 days later a profit warning, and then they suddenly found out, okay, we were hit by the subprime crisis, and the consequence was that the share price fell from 33 euros to 7 euros. So, I mean, the shareholders of IKB really suffered a lot because the company and the share could not recover since then. So, again, this was a good case for us because we could ask for a special audit to examine the failures of the management, also the supervisory board, with regard to the information policy of the company. Here, it is a case where the shareholders can claim directly compensation, and this is based on misleading information of the capital market. Again, this was 2007, and the procedure is still there. So you see, German courts, it's a long way, and you need a lot of patience if you want to get something back. So this brings me a little bit to the place, maybe it's the right place to draw a little the balance and have a look at the German system, also a little critical, because I think it also shows the weaknesses of our German system. And one of the weaknesses is definitely that we do not have a direct compensation claim by shareholders in case of mismanagement, and it's only a derivative action by the board. And the second weakness I would point out is that we do not have class actions as we have it in the US. I mean, of course, German companies are scared of the US class actions, but if we would at least have something like the collective actions we have in the Netherlands, where they have the regime of the WCAM, this would already help us a lot and bring us a step forward. Now, these were the legal actions and the shareholder rights in Germany. I want not to leave you because I want to tell you a little bit about the topics, the most interesting topics of this season. And as you can see, dividends, executive compensation are always there. And still the top #1 topic for all shareholders, I think there's the difference between the minority shareholder and the majority shareholder is definitely the shareholder return, so it is the dividend and the share price performance that is still number one of importance if you look at minority shareholders' interests. Second issue, directors' pay, board remuneration. And here we have, first of all, the remuneration pay of the supervisory board. This is actually specified by the bylaws or statutes. And there is a rule in Germany which says the remuneration of the supervisory board should be in an appropriate relation to the tasks of the board members and also to the economic situation of the company. And as a result, actually, of the financial crisis, there were some changes in our corporate governance code, and now we try to emphasize not as much the short-term thinking, but we say the pay should also depend on the sustainable development of the company, and sustainable in Germany is defined at minimum 3 years. So we want to go a little bit away from the short-term thinking. This is how a general meeting should not necessarily be. So very often we still find situations like this. So if we take a look at how much a board member in the German Supervisory Board earned in last year, you see it's increased on average. And this is, to take a look at this, is just for supervisory management. And if you take a look for ordinary member, it's 101,000 average. And of course, interesting to see that the highest paid chair last year was the chair of Volkswagen, who earned more than €1 million just for supervising management. Take a look at the, not the 30 largest, but the next index, which is more medium-sized companies, called the MDAX, that's the index. You see it's lower, much lower, but still increased compared to the year before. And more interesting probably is the management and how much they earned, and I have some figures there later. And new is, this is something I should mention, I don't know how the situation actually is, but we introduced in 2010 a say on pay, which means shareholder vote on the remuneration system, on the pay system. This is new, and it's voluntarily done. And as you can see, most of the DAX 30 big companies, but even the medium-sized companies, followed this demand of DSW and of the shareholders to put the pay system on the agenda and let it vote on and approved by the shareholders. Now, the typical pay package in Germany, if you look at the management board, executive board, is that they get a salary, they get a short-term incentive, and they get a long-term incentive. And they have pensions, and very often also salaries pay agreements. Now, if you take a look at the development of the figures, again you see there is quite good development going upwards. Of course, we have to take into consideration that the economic situation of the companies was very good in the last years, and of course this also is one of the reasons for the increase in the salary. And we had heavy debates in Germany on the question how much can a CEO earn in a German company, and the debate was actually caused by Volkswagen again, because the CEO of Volkswagen, he earned in 2012 14.5 million euros. And for German standards, that is extreme. That is a lot. So there were a lot of discussions whether we shouldn't draw a line, for example, at 10 million. Say this is actually enough for a manager about the case of Volkswagen is because of the public debate, because of the strong criticism, Volkswagen decided to change the pay system and put a cap on the CEO's pay so that in the future we will not have these extreme developments anymore. So, another topic besides directors' pay was this year the board elections. Now, the board is being, the supervisory board is being elected by the general meeting for 5 years. And this year was an interesting year because we call it was a super election year, which meant that from the 30 largest companies, there were 79 candidates that stood up for election or re-election. And this year, there was a lot of discussion on the nominating procedure for these board members. So we were talking about what should the ideal board member have. You know, should have, of course, high quality, good qualification. We always need at least one financial expert on the board, and we need independent members. As a shareholder association, we would like to have majority independent on the board, which doesn't mean incompetent, but means independent but competent and with high quality. And we also look at diversity, and this is a subject that there's still a lot to do. In Germany, we do not have a quota like I think I learned yesterday you have in your country, and maybe this is the reason why we are still having poor performance with regard to diversity. If we take a look at 2012, you see figures, and it's always worth having a look at the larger portion, the 12%, is coming from the employee side and not from the shareholder side. The shareholder side is just 7.4% of females on boards of the DAX 30 companies. And if you look at the committees, and everybody who knows the business of the supervisory board knows the work in the committee is really important work, because this is where you have influence, and this is where you can really change things. And there again you see that's even worse, because you have 89% of male representatives sitting in the decisive board committees, but not enough women. So diversity still is a big issue in Germany, but there is no legal quota in sight. Maybe we will import it in the next years from the European Union, possibly because the EU Commission is planning something like this, but it will not come out of the EU. Last hot topic, I would say, for this year was independence of the auditor. Maybe this is also a topic of interest for you. There is and was a lot of debate of the dominance of the big four auditing companies in Germany. We have KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and BDO. These are the four large ones, and they cover actually all of the, let's say the majority, 90% of the German market is covered by them. We actually would like to have more rotation, not mandatory rotation necessary, but more rotation to make them more independent. And that's why we, as DAW, ask for regular tenders, which means that every 5 to 7 years we should have a beauty contest to select possibly a new auditor. And we are also against auditing, and then at the same time the auditing company is giving consulting services to the company, because we think this could endanger the independence of the auditor. So this is something we look at. And before I close, I wanted to mention the European activities, because they are so important. And Euro Shareholders is the name of the old organization. European News is now the new name. And it is very important that we are working in Europe, in Brussels, in our office together. We're very glad that we have the Icelandic Investor Association as part of this European activity. I think whenever we go to Brussels or have our meetings, we learn a lot from the other countries. We learn how we can improve our own system. We learn also that sometimes we have good things in our system that we can maybe help the others with. I think lobbying in Brussels is very important from the shareholder point of view, because the financial crisis, before the financial crisis, there were only financial institutions that had a voice in Brussels. But this changed. I think it changed dramatically, and with our European organization, which is pretty strong now, we have a voice in Brussels now, and the voice is even heard from the EU Commission. When we go to the EU Commission, we go to speak to EU parliamentarians, and we go to speak to the EU Council, and all this lobbying activity at the end is bringing advantages for the minority shareholders. And one last point I would like to mention European activities is we have a project which is called Eurovote, and this means that shareholders that invest not only domestically but also internationally, at least that's what the German shareholders do. They buy McDonald's shares, they buy Unilever, they buy international. Now we think they should not only give the capital, but they should also have the rights to exercise them cross-border. And we set up this project, we set up a website where you can at least exercise the votes cross-border with regard to the 50 strongest European companies, the Eurostoxx 50, and we offer the general meeting, we also offer all the voting forms and instructions, and we have representatives going to the meeting to represent the shareholders. This sounds easy, but it is not easy. Everything which is cross-border has a lot of barriers, has a lot of formality, and very often too short deadlines to exercise all the rights. So there is a lot to do, and this is one of the reasons why we go to the EU Commission process and say you have to abolish the barriers that we have in order to enable cross-border voting. I think it's a very important issue because we should also have the rights as a shareholder to vote cross-border. So these are the advantages of our platform. We're still at the beginning. There are countries where it's working well, but there are other countries where we have more difficulties. We actually wrote a book on this and to introduce it at the EU Commission, and they were very willing to read it and to study it and to do something against it. Now, this is all, I think, from my part. Germany on the European Union, and I think, thank for your patience, and I think I'm ready for questions. Thank you.